Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says he will appear before the United Nations Security Council in the next 2 weeks to address the new U.S. plan for Israeli-Palestinian peace. The proposal was put forward yesterday from the White House. It calls for a two-state solution, but would recognize Israeli sovereignty over all of Jerusalem, as well as Israel's claim over the Jordan Valley. Joining us now to answer your questions on the new U.S. peace plan is Jon Allen. Jon served as Canada's ambassador to Israel from 2006 to 2010. He is a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs in Toronto. Jon, thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure, Carol.
Okay, what was your reaction when you saw the details of this plan?
Well, I was very, very disappointed. I didn't have high expectations because there was a fair bit of indication that this wasn't going to be much of a compromise. And the reality is that it favors Israel in almost every aspect and is a disaster for the Palestinian people.
Okay, give me an example of how it favors Israel, in your opinion.
Well, there are 4 or 5 final status issues that have to be agreed upon by the two sides. Jerusalem, as you mentioned, is one of them. This plan basically gives all of what we know of Jerusalem as Jerusalem to the Israelis. It gives a Jerusalem to the Palestinians, but one that is behind the existing wall. The compromise was supposed to begin with the pre-1967 boundaries. That concept has been done away with, and Israel has basically been granted the right to annex settlements, to annex the Jordan Valley, as was mentioned. The right of return of refugees is not mentioned at all. In terms of sovereignty, the Israelis will retain control over the air, the sea, ports, the territorial waters, and all of the borders. So you don't really have a sovereign Palestinian state at all.
Okay, so the Palestinians really, some of the crucial things here, as I understand it, removal of the Jewish settlements in the West Bank, which they didn't get, a contiguous border, which is not there, and East Jerusalem as their national capital. What did the Israelis give up in this plan?
The Israelis haven't given up anything, and that's what's so shocking about it. The United States normally acts as an honest broker, brings two sides together to compromise, and essentially Donald Trump has given Bibi Netanyahu everything that he and the pro-settlement folks in Israel and the United States wished for.
Okay, what about the offer of a $50 billion in investment if Palestinians accept this?
Well, I think it's a pretty easy offer on 2 grounds. First of all, the Palestinians will never accept this plan, nor should the international community. And secondly, the $50 billion is not American money. It's money that is allegedly going to come from a variety of Arab states. And as you know, money is often promised and often not delivered.
Okay. We have a question from Lindsay now. Have a listen.
I'm concerned how much input Palestine actually had into it. I know that people are often afraid to say anything negative about Israel as a state for fear of being seen as anti-Semitic, but it seems like the needs of the Palestinian people is often forgotten, especially when there's still incursions of illegal Israeli housing on technically Palestinian land.
Jon Allen?
Yes, I think the question is accurate. The Palestinians had virtually no input into this so-called negotiation. Once President Trump had declared Jerusalem to be Israeli, had cut off funds to the Palestinians, and had cut off funds to UNRWA, the refugee agency responsible for refugees in Gaza, the Palestinians stopped dealing with the Americans and vice versa. So this was a negotiation essentially between the United States and Israel.
Okay, we have a question, a comment from Twitter. Margaret writes, the problem is getting both sides to agree. I don't think either side could ever do that. In a two-state solution, somebody would not get everything they wanted.
Well, that's correct. Somebody will not get everything they wanted. Both sides will not get everything they wanted, and that's what negotiations, mediations are all about. And as I said, that's what the Americans used to do, try and bring the two sides together, each giving up something, recognizing that Israel's security, of course, has to be maintained, but that going forward, there will only be peace and stability in the Middle East if there is a two-state solution. And this plan simply ignores that reality.
Well, some Palestinian activists are now saying maybe it's time for the Palestinian Authority to dismantle itself, to break up in some way, and leave the governance of some 2.5 million Palestinians inside Israel as citizens of Israel. So meaning that Israel will be responsible for their education, equal health care, and security. What would that look like?
Well, that is the end result of a non-two-state solution, and it's going to look like one of two things. If those Palestinians do indeed get Israeli citizenship, they will, in very short time, become the majority in Israel. And Israel will then have two choices. It will either be democratic, and a majority of Palestinians will vote and likely win elections, or it will create an apartheid state where a minority of Israelis and Jews will rule over a majority of Palestinians. And that's what everybody has been trying to avoid by having a two-state solution. And I can see why Palestinians might now be saying enough is enough and let's put this to the test.
Okay, where is the Arab world on this, John?
Well, I was disconcerted to hear that the Egyptians last night seemed interested in studying the plan. I don't think the rest of the Arab world has spoken yet. I have not seen any reaction. And I think there would be great concern on their part because there are large Palestinian populations in various Arab countries, including Jordan and Saudi Arabia. And the street will be very angry. The people on the street in those countries will be very angry at the result of this alleged peace plan.
Where do you think it's going to go now?
Well, you have essentially an indicted prime minister in Israel who has now been formally indicted, who is going to elections.
On fraud charges.
On fraud charges. There is some question as to whether or not an interim prime minister, a caretaker prime minister, should even be engaging in this kind of activity. For example, a caretaker prime minister in Israel cannot even appoint an ambassador, an Israeli ambassador. Just like in Canada, if you were heading to an election, a prime minister wouldn't be allowed to take cabinet decisions or budget decisions, etc. So there's a question of whether, for example, Bibi Netanyahu is going to be able to move ahead with annexation of the West Bank as he promised to do from the podium at the White House.
Yes, within days.
Within days.
Yeah.
So where is it going to go? I think we'll have to wait for the Israeli election. And then we'll have to wait for the American elections, because I think you have to realize these policies by Donald Trump, these recommendations have gone far beyond any other U.S. president. And I think I could safely say that if a Democrat were elected in the United States, this plan would be taken off the table very quickly.
All right. Jon Allen, we'll leave it there. John, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Jon Allen is a former Canadian ambassador to Israel and senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy in Toronto.